The blood-stained dust of Sweetwater Creek, Texas, carried the scent of violence on the late summer breeze as Willow Lawson's body crumpled to the ground outside the general store, her cries for mercy silenced by another brutal kick to her ribs. The year was 1873, and justice for women like her was as scarce as rain in the drought-stricken territory. "That'll teach you to steal from decent folk," snarled the larger of the three men, his tobacco-stained beard catching the afternoon sunlight as he spat beside her fallen form. The vicious lie they'd concocted about missing money from the saloon till had been all the excuse they needed. Willow's vision blurred as she tried to push herself up, her once white dress now torn and smeared with the red dirt of the main street. At 22, she'd survived plenty in her young life, but never a beating like this. The orphaned daughter of settlers killed in a raid years before, she'd scraped by as a laundress and occasional serving girl at the Desert Rose Saloon, where her refusal of the owner's son's advances had finally caught up with her. "I never took nothing," she managed, tasting blood on her lips. "Shut your lying mouth," the second man growled, delivering another kick that sent pain radiating through her body. "Women like you need to learn their place." The townsfolk who witnessed the violence hurried past with downcast eyes. Not one stood to defend her. In Sweetwater Creek, those with money and influence made the rules, and everyone else suffered the consequences. "Can't even stand up now, can you?" taunted the third man, yanking her by the hair. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before." The unmistakable click of a revolver hammer being pulled back cut through the afternoon air. "Let her go," came a low, steady voice from the street. The three men turned, the one gripping Willow's hair reluctantly releasing her. She fell back into the dirt, struggling to focus her vision on the newcomer. He sat astride a dust-covered palomino, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the harsh Texas sun. Unlike the town's usual visitors, there was something immediately commanding about his presence, something that made even these three brutes pause. "This ain't your business, stranger," said the bearded man, though he'd taken a step back. "I'm making it my business." The rider dismounted with fluid grace that belied his tall frame. His face came into view as he stepped forward, weather-beaten but handsome, with eyes the color of a storm cloud and a stubbled jaw set in determination. He couldn't have been more than 30, but carried himself like a man who'd seen twice that many years of hard living. "Name's Ryder Dawson," he continued, his gun still leveled at the men. "And where I come from, 3 men beating a woman in broad daylight is the kind of thing that ends badly." The three exchanged glances, measuring their odds against the steady hand holding the Colt revolver and the confidence with which he wielded it. "She's a thief," the bearded one tried again, but with considerably less conviction. "Don't look that way to me," Ryder replied, his eyes never leaving them. "Looks to me like 3 cowards making themselves feel big. Now back away before I decide this town needs fewer cowards." After a moment's hesitation, they backed off, muttering threats as they retreated toward the saloon. Only when they were gone did Ryder holster his weapon and kneel beside Willow. His expression softened as he took in her battered state. "Can you stand, miss?" he asked gently. Willow tried to push herself up again, determination flaring through the pain, but her legs gave out beneath her. Tears of frustration and humiliation welled in her eyes. Without hesitation, Ryder slipped strong arms beneath her and lifted her as though she weighed nothing. The scent of leather, horse, and something clean like pine surrounded her as he cradled her against his chest. "Don't worry," he said, his voice a quiet rumble she could feel through his shirt. "You'll stand with me." Something in those simple words, a promise from a stranger when no one else would help, broke through the last of Willow's defenses. As he carried her toward the town's small doctor's office, she allowed herself to surrender to the darkness that had been threatening since the first blow landed. When Willow awakened, the setting sun cast long shadows across the sparse room where she lay. Pain radiated through her body as memories flooded back the accusations, the beating, and the stranger who'd intervened. She tried to sit up and winced. "Easy now," came a voice from the corner. "Doc Harmon says you've got 2 bruised ribs and more cuts and bruises than he cared to count." Ryder Dawson sat in a wooden chair by the door, hat in his hands. The evening light caught the silver threads in his otherwise dark hair. "Why did you help me?" Her voice was raspy, her throat parched. He crossed the room and poured water from a pitcher into a glass, helping her take small sips before answering. "Some things a man can't ride past." His eyes met hers, serious and steady. "Those men had no right. They'll come looking for trouble now, for both of us," Willow warned. "Maxwell Brody doesn't take kindly to being shown up." "Brody, the bearded one. His father owns half the town, including the saloon where I work." She looked away. "Where I worked, I suppose. Can't go back now." Ryder studied her for a moment. "You got folks around here? Someone who can look after you while you heal?" The question stung worse than her physical wounds. "No, my parents died when I was 16. I've been on my own since." He nodded as though her answer confirmed something for him. "Well, Miss Lawson, Willow Lawson." "Miss Lawson, I've got a small ranch about a day's ride north of here. Nothing fancy, but there's a spare room and no Maxwell Brody." He said it matter-of-factly, without a trace of pity that might have made her refuse. "You'd be welcome there while you recover." Willow's eyes narrowed with suspicion born from harsh experience. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because I've seen what happens to people with no safe harbor in places like this." Something haunted flickered across his face before disappearing. "And because those men will be back with more friends next time." She knew he was right. Before she could respond, the door opened, and a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose entered. "Ah, you're awake, Miss Lawson." Dr. Harmon approached, checking her bruises with gentle hands. "You're lucky Mr. Dawson brought you in when he did. Those ribs will take time to heal, but you'll mend." "How much do I owe you, doctor?" Willow asked, anxiety already building. Her meager savings would barely cover a single visit. "It's taken care of," the doctor replied, glancing at Ryder. Willow's pride flared. "I don't need charity, it's not charity," Ryder interrupted. "Consider it an advance. My housekeeper left last month and the place could use a woman's touch. Once you're healed enough to work, you can earn your keep." It was a convenient fiction, offering her dignity along with refuge, and they both knew it. Still, the prospect of facing Maxwell Brody and his cronies again made the decision surprisingly easy. "I can cook and clean," she said finally, "and I can work to repay the doctor's fee." "Then it's settled," Ryder replied, the faintest hint of a smile warming his features. "We'll leave at first light if the doctor agrees you can travel." That night, as Willow drifted between sleep and wakefulness on the narrow cot in the doctor's back room, she wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. She knew nothing about Ryder Dawson beyond his intervention and his apparent generosity. Yet something in his steady gaze and the careful way he'd handled her broken body told her she could trust him at least more than she could trust anyone in Sweetwater Creek. When morning came, the town was just stirring as Ryder helped her onto his palomino, her few possessions packed into a single bag. She sat in front of him in the saddle, his arms on either side keeping her steady. The intimacy of the arrangement would have scandalized proper society, but Willow had long since stopped caring what Sweetwater's so-called respectable citizens thought of her. They rode out just as Maxwell Brody and his father emerged from the hotel across the street. The elder Brody's face contorted with rage at the sight of them. "This ain't over, Dawson," he shouted. "Nobody crosses the Brodys and gets away with it." Ryder didn't even turn his head, but Willow felt his arm tighten slightly around her waist, whether in reassurance or anger. She couldn't tell. "They'll come after us," she said quietly as the town receded behind them. "Let them try," was all he said, and the calm confidence in his voice was more reassuring than any elaborate promises might have been. The journey north was slow and careful, with frequent stops to allow Willow to rest. Ryder proved himself a considerate traveling companion, attentive to her comfort without being overbearing. As the day wore on, and the landscape shifted from flat plains to gently rolling hills dotted with cottonwoods and mesquite, Willow gradually learned more about the man who'd come to her rescue. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked during one rest stop as they sat in the shade of an ancient oak beside a small creek. "Going on 5 years now," he replied, passing her a canteen. "Started with just 50 acres and a broken-down cabin, built it up piece by piece. And before that—" A shadow crossed his face. "Rode with the Texas Rangers for a while after the war. Before that—" He paused. "That's a longer story for another time." Willow sensed the boundaries in his response and respected them. She had her own past she preferred not to discuss. "What made you stop in Sweetwater Creek?" she asked instead. "It's hardly on the main trail. Needed supplies and my horse needed rest." His gaze met hers. "Seems like Providence now." The simple statement hung in the air between them, neither willing to examine too closely what might have happened had their paths not crossed. By late afternoon, Willow was flagging, the pain in her ribs a constant, sharp presence with every hoofbeat. Ryder noticed her increasingly rigid posture. "We're close now," he assured her. "Another hour at most." True to his word, just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they crested a rise, and Willow caught her first glimpse of what would be her temporary home. The small ranch Ryder had described so modestly revealed itself to be a tidy spread nestled in a sheltered valley. A sturdy 2-story house built of local stone and timber stood at the center, flanked by a large barn and several outbuildings. Pastureland stretched in 3 directions, dotted with cattle, while a fenced garden plot adjacent to the house hinted at self-sufficiency. "You call this small?" Willow couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. A hint of pride colored Ryder's tone. "Compared to the big outfits further north, it is. But it's mine, free and clear." As they approached, a pair of border collies raced out to greet them, followed by a tall, lanky young man who emerged from the barn. "That's Owen," Ryder explained. "My ranch hand, good kid, doesn't talk much." Owen, who Willow guessed to be about 19, nodded respectfully as Ryder helped her down from the horse. If he was curious about her battered appearance or why his employer had brought home a strange woman, he didn't show it. "Everything all right while I was gone?" Ryder asked him. "Yes, sir." "Got those fence posts replaced on the north section like you asked?" Owen's eyes flickered to Willow briefly. "Madam." "Owen, this is Miss Lawson," Ryder said. "She'll be staying with us for a while, helping with the house." The young man nodded again, taking the reins of Ryder's horse. "I'll see to sundown, sir." The interior of the house surprised Willow even more than its exterior. While not lavish, it was well built and thoughtfully arranged, with solid furniture and unexpected touches of refinement. A proper parlor with bookshelves lined one wall, and the kitchen boasted a modern cast-iron stove. The floors were swept clean, but it was evident that no woman's hand had maintained the place recently. "Your room will be upstairs, first door on the right," Ryder told her, carrying her bag. "Mine's at the end of the hall, and there's another we use for storage. Washroom's off the kitchen." He showed her upstairs, opening the door to reveal a simply furnished but pleasant bedroom with a real bed, not just a cot, covered with a handmade quilt. A dresser with a mirror stood against one wall, and curtains framed a window that looked out over the valley. "It was my mother's quilt," he said when he caught her admiring the intricate pattern. "One of the few things I have of hers." "It's beautiful," Willow said softly, touched by this glimpse into his past. "Thank you for all this, Mr. Dawson. I don't know how I'll ever repay such kindness." "Ryder," he corrected. "And there's no debt here, just rest now. We can talk more in the morning." After he left, Willow sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past 24 hours. Her body ached, and uncertainty about her future loomed large. Yet for the first time in years, she felt a fragile sense of security. Whether it would last was another matter entirely. The next week passed in a gentle rhythm as Willow's body slowly began to heal. True to his word, Ryder demanded nothing of her in return for his hospitality, insisting she focus on recovery. Despite her lingering pain, she found herself increasingly restless, unaccustomed to idleness. By the 8th day, she could no longer abide feeling useless. She rose early and made her way to the kitchen, determined to prepare breakfast before the men returned from their morning chores. The simple act of mixing biscuit dough, frying bacon, brewing coffee brought a sense of normalcy she hadn't realized she'd been missing. When Ryder and Owen entered the kitchen to find the table set and a hot meal waiting, surprise registered on both their faces. "You shouldn't be exerting yourself yet," Ryder said, though his eyes appreciated the spread before him. "I'm going stir-crazy sitting around," Willow replied, pouring coffee into thick mugs. "Besides, my arms and legs work fine. It's just my ribs that protest if I move too quickly." Owen, usually silent, spoke up unexpectedly. "These are the best biscuits I've had since my grandmother's," he said after taking a bite, a shy smile transforming his solemn face. "High praise indeed," Ryder commented, his own expression warming as he observed the simple pleasure good food brought to his young employee. Something in that moment, the domestic tranquility of it seemed to soften the habitually guarded set of his shoulders. After that morning, Willow gradually took over more household duties, careful not to overtax her healing body. She discovered that the satisfaction of bringing order to the neglected home outweighed her discomfort. The pantry was reorganized, dusty corners swept clean, and linens washed and hung in the Texas sunshine to dry. Ryder gave her free rein over the house, but maintained his own reserve. He was unfailingly polite, even kind, but revealed little about himself beyond what daily conversation required. Still, Willow noticed how his eyes sometimes followed her movements when he thought she wasn't looking, with an expression that seemed equal parts curiosity and wariness. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after their arrival, Willow found Ryder alone on the porch, nursing a glass of whiskey as he watched the sunset paint the western sky in vivid oranges and purples. Emboldened by the peaceful moment, she settled into the chair beside his. "It's beautiful here," she said. "So different from Sweetwater Creek." "That's why I chose it," he replied. "Far enough from anywhere to avoid unwanted company, close enough to civilization when needed. And who might constitute unwanted company?" she asked, sensing there was more to his choice of isolation than simple preference. He considered her for a long moment, the fading light casting shadows across the planes of his face. "You're direct, Willow Lawson. Life's too short for dancing around subjects," she replied. "Especially when you've seen its fragility up close." Something in her words seemed to reach him. He took another sip of whiskey before responding. "I've made enemies, as most men who have lived my kind of life have." His voice dropped lower. The ranger's work doesn't end clean. Some folks hold grudges. Is that why you left them? Partly. He set his glass down, turning to face her fully. My turn for directness. Those men in Sweetwater, what really happened? Willow tensed, then forced herself to relax. She owed him the truth, at least. Maxwell Brody wanted more than I was willing to give, she said simply. When I refused his advances for the third time, money went missing from the till. It wasn't hard to guess who they'd blame. Ryder's jaw tightened. And no one spoke for you. Women like me don't get defenders in places like that, she said without self-pity. A laundress with no family, working in a saloon. I'm surprised they bothered with the theft accusation at all before deciding I needed teaching. His hand, resting on the arm of his chair, clenched into a fist. It wasn't right. No, she agreed softly. It wasn't, but you stepped in when no one else would. Why? The question had been burning in her mind since that day. Ryder stared out at the darkening landscape before answering. I had a sister once, he finally said, each word measured. Hannah. She was 17 when a group of men decided she'd insulted one of them by declining his attentions. Nobody stepped in. She didn't survive what they did to her. Willow's breath caught. I'm so sorry. It was during the war, he continued, as if needing to unburden himself now that he'd started. I was away fighting. By the time I got home, the men responsible had scattered. I spent 3 years tracking them down one by one. The implications hung in the air between them. Did you find them all? She asked quietly. All but one. His profile was hard in the gathering dusk. Calvin Blackwell. Last I heard, he was running with a gang near the New Mexico border. And when you find him, then it ends. He looked down at his hands as though seeing the blood that already stained them. But I've learned vengeance doesn't bring peace, just more emptiness. Willow reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his. He stiffened at the contact but didn't pull away. Thank you for telling me, she said. And thank you again for what you did in Sweetwater Creek. His fingers curled slightly around hers, the briefest acknowledgement of the connection forming between them. We should head in, he said after a moment, withdrawing his hand. Early start tomorrow. As Willow lay in bed that night, she reflected on the revelations Ryder had shared. His intervention in Sweetwater had not been random chance, but motivated by a past tragedy he couldn't prevent. The knowledge created a new understanding between them, both scarred by violence, both survivors in their own ways. The following weeks brought subtle changes to life at the ranch. Ryder began including Willow in more decisions about the household, seeking her opinion on repairs needed or supplies to order on his next trip to the trading post. For her part, Willow found herself watching for his return whenever he rode out, a flutter of anticipation replacing her initial wariness. As her strength returned, she ventured further from the house, exploring the boundaries of her new temporary home. One afternoon, she discovered a small stream that wound through a stand of cottonwoods at the property's edge. The peaceful spot, with its bubbling water and dappled shade, became her refuge when the memories of Sweetwater grew too vivid. It was there that Ryder found her one day in early October, nearly a month after their arrival. She sat with her back against a tree trunk, eyes closed as she listened to the water's soothing music. Owen said you might be here, he said, his approach deliberately noisy enough not to startle her. Willow opened her eyes, smiling up at him. It reminds me of a place near our homestead when I was a child, before everything changed. He settled beside her, respectful of her space yet close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling autumn air. I'm heading to Bridgeport tomorrow for supplies, he said. Thought you might want to come along, get off the property for a spell. The invitation surprised her. Won't people talk, seeing you with an unknown woman? A hint of a smile crossed his features. Bridgeport's a fair bit more civilized than Sweetwater Creek. Besides, I reckon most folks there know better than to meddle in my business. Willow considered the offer. The prospect of seeing somewhere new was tempting, yet anxiety flickered at the thought of facing strangers' potential judgment. I'd like that, she decided, pushing past her reservations. Thank you. Ryder nodded, seemingly pleased by her acceptance. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the late afternoon light filter through the leaves. Your ribs seem to be healing well, he observed. You move easier now. Yes, much better, she confirmed, though I still need to be careful with sudden movements. Good. He hesitated, then continued. Been meaning to ask what are your plans once you're fully recovered. The question caught her off guard, though she'd known it would come eventually. The truth was, she hadn't allowed herself to think too far ahead. I don't know, she admitted. I can't go back to Sweetwater, that's certain. No, he agreed. That wouldn't be wise. Perhaps Fort Worth or Dallas, she mused. Somewhere big enough that I could find work without questions about my past. Ryder picked up a small stone, turning it over in his fingers. You could stay on here, he said, the casual tone belied by the tension in his shoulders. Not just until you're healed, permanently. Willow's heart quickened. As your housekeeper, you mean? His eyes met hers, and something in their depths made her breath catch. If that's what you want to call it, but I think we both know there's more between us than employer and employee. The directness of his statement left no room for pretense. Willow had felt the growing connection between them in shared glances across the dinner table, in the way his hand sometimes lingered when passing her something, in the conversations that stretched late into the evening. But she hadn't dared name it even to herself. Ryder, she began, uncertain how to respond. You don't need to answer now, he said quickly. Just think on it. The ranch runs smoother with you here. Owen smiles more and He paused, searching for words. I find myself looking forward to coming back to the house in a way I never did before. The simple admission, from a man so habitually reserved, touched her more deeply than any flowery declaration might have. I'll think about it, she promised. The ride to Bridgeport the next day provided a welcome change of scenery. The small but thriving town served as a supply center for the surrounding ranches and farms. Unlike Sweetwater Creek, with its rough frontier atmosphere, Bridgeport boasted proper streets, a schoolhouse, and even a small hotel for travelers. As they made their way down the main street, Willow was acutely aware of curious glances from the townspeople. Ryder's reserved nods of greeting as they passed indicated he was known but not intimately connected to the community. Their first stop was the general store, where Ryder introduced her simply as Miss Lawson, who's helping at my ranch. If the storekeeper wondered about the arrangement, he kept his thoughts to himself, treating Willow with polite deference. While Ryder discussed an order of fencing materials with the proprietor, Willow browsed the shelves, mentally cataloging items the ranch house needed. She was examining bolts of fabric when a woman's voice behind her made her turn. You're with Ryder Dawson, aren't you? The speaker was a well-dressed woman in her 40s, her assessing gaze direct but not unfriendly. Yes, Willow replied cautiously. I'm staying at his ranch. I'm Margaret Preston. My husband's the town doctor. She extended a gloved hand, which Willow shook after only a slight hesitation. It's good to see Ryder with company. He keeps to himself too much since he settled here. Before Willow could formulate a response, Margaret continued, lowering her voice slightly. Those bruises are fading, but they're still visible if one knows to look. Trouble follow you here, Willow stiffened. I don't know what you mean. No offense intended, dear, Margaret said with a kind smile. I've been a doctor's wife long enough to recognize the marks of violence, and Ryder's not the type to inflict them, whatever else people might whisper about his past. The realization that this stranger had so quickly assessed her situation left Willow momentarily speechless. Margaret seemed to sense her discomfort. "Forgive my forwardness. It's just that Ryder helped my son once when a hunting accident left him stranded miles from town. I've always felt we owed him a debt. If you're important to him, then I'd like to help if I can." The unexpected offer of alliance from this respectable woman touched something in Willow. "Thank you," she said quietly, "but we're managing well enough." "I'm sure you are." Margaret's smile warmed further. "But should you ever need a friend in town, or just female company after being surrounded by men and cattle, our home is on Elm Street, the white house with green shutters." The conversation left Willow thoughtful as she and Ryder completed their errands. The people of Bridgeport treated Ryder with a mixture of respect and cautious distance that suggested they knew fragments of his history, but not the whole story. No one challenged his presence, yet few engaged him beyond necessary business except for the blacksmith, a burly man named Heinrich who greeted him with genuine warmth. "You bring a lady friend at last." Heinrich boomed when they stopped at his shop, his German accent still thick despite years in Texas. "Is good. Too long alone on that ranch, yeah." Ryder's usual reserve cracked slightly as he clasped the blacksmith's massive hand. "Miss Lawson's helping with the house while my regular housekeeper is away," he said, the practiced explanation coming easily. Heinrich's knowing grin suggested he didn't believe the story for a moment but was willing to play along. Of course, and such a pretty housekeeper. Much improvement over old Mrs. Collins, I think." Willow couldn't help but smile at the man's transparent attempt at matchmaking. When Ryder stepped away to examine some horseshoes, Heinrich leaned closer to her. "He is good man," the blacksmith said in a lowered voice. "Saved my boy from rustlers 2 winters ago. Never asked for thanks, but such debts, we remember." It was the second time that day someone had mentioned being indebted to Ryder for assistance given freely. The portrait emerging was of a man who kept his distance from society, yet didn't hesitate to help when needed and expected nothing in return. By the time they headed back to the ranch, the sun was low in the western sky. Willow felt a curious mix of emotions: relief at escaping the scrutiny of strangers, appreciation for the few who had treated her kindly, and a growing certainty about her feelings for the complex man riding beside her. They were halfway home when Ryder suddenly reined in his horse, his posture alert. "What is it?" Willow asked, instantly tense. "Smoke," he said grimly, pointing to a dark smudge rising against the horizon in the direction of the ranch. Without another word, he urged his horse into a gallop, Willow struggling to keep pace in the wagon they'd brought for supplies. By the time they crested the final rise overlooking the ranch, her heart was pounding with fear. Below them, chaos reigned. The barn was engulfed in flames, orange tongues licking at the afternoon sky. Several men on horseback circled the structure while others appeared to be ransacking the main house. Of Owen, there was no sign. "Stay here," Ryder ordered, drawing his rifle from its saddle holster. "But Willow." His voice brooked no argument. "Stay out of sight. If anything happens to me, head back to Bridgeport. Find the Prestons." Before she could protest further, he was gone, guiding his horse down a side trail that would bring him to the ranch from an unexpected direction. Willow watched in helpless horror as he approached the property, using the terrain for cover. When he disappeared from view behind a stand of trees, the waiting became unbearable. The sound of distant gunshots sent her heart into her throat. After what felt like an eternity but was likely only minutes, she made her decision. She couldn't remain safely hidden while Ryder and possibly Owen were in danger. Tying the wagon horses to a sturdy shrub, she began making her way down the hillside on foot, staying low and using the same route Ryder had taken. As she neared the edge of the property, the smell of smoke grew stronger. She could hear men shouting, though individual words were lost in the crackle of the fire and sporadic gunfire. Creeping forward, she reached the cover of the orchard Ryder had planted 3 years earlier. From there, she could see most of the yard. 4 men lay motionless on the ground. 3 others had taken cover behind an overturned wagon, exchanging fire with Ryder, who was positioned behind the stone well. Of Owen and any other attackers, she saw no sign. Willow was so focused on the standoff that she almost missed the movement to her right. A man was creeping through the orchard, circling to come up behind Ryder's position. Without conscious thought, she grabbed a fallen branch and stepped into his path. "Ryder, behind you," she shouted, swinging the makeshift weapon with all her strength. The warning gave Ryder just enough time to spin around as her branch connected with the attacker's shoulder. It wasn't enough to stop him, but it threw off his aim. His shot went wild as Ryder fired, catching him squarely in the chest. The distraction, however, left Ryder exposed to the men behind the wagon. As one rose to take advantage, another shot rang out from the direction of the house. The would-be shooter fell, and Willow glimpsed Owen's lanky form in an upstairs window, rifle in hand. The tide turned quickly after that. The remaining attackers, realizing they'd lost the element of surprise and were now outgunned, retreated hastily, firing wildly as they mounted their horses and fled toward the hills. In the sudden quiet, broken only by the continued crackling of the barn fire, Ryder rushed to Willow's side. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands checking her for injuries even as his eyes scanned the retreating riders. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her whole body trembled with the aftermath of danger. "Owen, hit in the arm, but he'll be all right. I told you to stay hidden." There was more fear than anger in his voice. "And I couldn't just watch while you might be killed," she countered. Their gazes held for a charged moment before the practical concerns of the situation reasserted themselves. The barn was still burning, threatening to spread to nearby structures if not contained. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Owen emerged from the house, his left arm bound in a makeshift bandage but otherwise functional. The 3 of them formed a bucket line from the well to the barn, managing to contain the blaze to the original structure, though it was a total loss. 2 horses had perished inside, a fact that seemed to grieve Ryder more than the material damage. As night fell, they retreated to the house, exhausted and smoke-stained. The interior had been ransacked but not seriously damaged. While Owen kept watch from the porch, Willow tended his wound properly, then helped Ryder move the bodies of the fallen raiders to a spot behind the barn where they could be buried the following day. It was nearly midnight when they finally had a moment to breathe, sitting at the kitchen table with cups of strong coffee laced with whiskey. "Who were they?" Willow asked, breaking the heavy silence. Ryder's expression was grim. "Recognize 2 of them. They ride with Calvin Blackwell." The name hung in the air between them, the last man on Ryder's list of vengeance, the one who had participated in his sister's murder and remained free. "How did they find you?" "Must have picked up my trail in Bridgeport," he said, rubbing a hand over his face. "I've been careful, but word gets around, especially when a man who usually rides alone suddenly has a woman beside him." The implication wasn't lost on Willow. Her presence had made Ryder more noticeable, perhaps more vulnerable. "He wasn't with them," Ryder continued. "Blackwell. He'd have made sure the job was finished." "Will they be back?" "Yes. His certainty left no room for comfort. Once Blackwell hears what happened, he'll come himself, probably with more men. Willow felt cold despite the warmth of the kitchen. Then we should leave, all of us, before they return. And go where? Ryder's laugh was without humor. This has been coming for years, Willow. There's nowhere far enough. Then face him somewhere else, she pleaded. Not here, where Owen could be caught in the crossfire again, where all you've built could be destroyed. He studied her across the table, his expression softening. You're right about Owen. He should go to Bridgeport tomorrow, stay with Heinrich until this is settled. And us? Willow asked quietly. There is no us in this fight, he said firmly. I'm taking you to Bridgeport too. The Prestons will look after you. Anger flared in Willow's chest, hot and unexpected. So you'll send me away, after everything? Because of everything, he corrected, reaching across the table to take her hand. Willow, these men already killed my sister. They nearly killed Owen today. If anything happened to you. And what about you? She demanded. You expect me to wait safely in town while you face these animals alone. For what purpose? More vengeance that won't bring Hannah back, her words struck home. She could see it in the way he flinched. But he didn't release her hand. Not vengeance, he said quietly. Protection. As long as Blackwell lives, anyone connected to me is in danger. It ends with him, one way or another. Willow recognized the implacable resolve in his voice. This was not a man who could be swayed by emotional appeals when he believed he was right. Then I'll go to Bridgeport, she conceded, seeing his relief. On one condition. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. What condition? That you promise not to face them alone. Send word to the Rangers, to the marshal in Bridgeport, anyone who can help, even the odds. For a long moment, he said nothing, weighing her request against his pride and his desire to keep others from being dragged into his personal war. I'll send word to Marshal Collins, he finally agreed. He owes me a favor. It wasn't everything she wanted, but it was something. Willow nodded, too exhausted to argue further. Get some rest, Ryder said, rising from the table. I'll take first watch. Wake me for the second shift, she insisted. You need sleep too. He looked as though he might refuse, then nodded. 3 hours. After he left, Willow remained at the table, staring into her cooling coffee. The day's events had stripped away any remaining illusions about the life she'd stumbled into. Ryder Dawson's past had caught up with him, and by extension with her. The peaceful existence at the ranch had been temporary, perhaps always destined to end in violence. Yet even knowing this, she couldn't regret the path that had brought her here. In Ryder, she'd found something she'd never expected. Not just safety or protection, but understanding. A shared resilience in the face of a world that had dealt them both cruel hands, and something more, something that had been growing between them, day by day, conversation by conversation. Something worth fighting for, even against the shadows of the past. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a mockery of the destruction evident in the light of day. The barn was a charred skeleton, the yard scarred by hoofprints and bullet holes. Owen, pale from blood loss but steady, helped Ryder bury the dead raiders in unmarked graves while Willow packed necessities for their journey to Bridgeport. They departed just before noon, Ryder insisting they travel together for safety. The mood was somber, each lost in private thoughts about what lay ahead. When they reached the outskirts of town, Ryder directed Owen to Heinrich's smithy before continuing on to the Prestons' home. Doctor. Preston answered the door himself, his expression shifting from polite inquiry to concern as he took in their trail-worn appearance. Trouble, Dawson? He asked without preamble. The worst kind, Ryder confirmed. Raiders hit the ranch yesterday. They'll be back with reinforcements. I need a safe place for Miss Lawson to stay while I deal with it. The doctor didn't hesitate. Of course. Margaret's been hoping for a visit since she met you in town, he added to Willow with a kind smile. Come in, both of you. Inside, Margaret Preston greeted them with the same direct warmth she'd shown in the store, immediately making Willow feel welcome despite the circumstances. When Ryder explained the situation, leaving out personal details but making the danger clear, she simply nodded. She'll be safe here, Margaret assured him. And you, will you be staying in town as well, just long enough to speak with Marshal Collins? Ryder replied. Then I'm heading back to the ranch. Alone? Dr. Preston frowned. That seems unnecessarily risky. They're coming for me, not the property, Ryder said. Better to meet them there than bring the fight to town. His logic was sound, but Willow saw the resolve forming in his eyes. He intended to face Blackwell alone, despite his promise to involve the marshal. Before she could call him on it, Margaret deftly ushered her upstairs to settle in, giving Ryder and the doctor privacy to continue their discussion. The guest room was comfortable, with a real feather bed and lace curtains framing the window. Willow set down her small bag, feeling oddly displaced. After weeks of making Ryder's house her domain, being a guest in someone else's home reinforced the temporary nature of her situation of her entire life since Sweetwater Creek. Margaret, perceptive as before, seemed to sense her thoughts. It's just until the danger passes, she said gently. From what I've seen, that man downstairs won't rest until he knows you can safely return home. Home. The word echoed in Willow's mind. When had she started thinking of the ranch as home? Thank you for taking me in, she said instead of examining that question too closely. I know it's an imposition. Nonsense. This house has been too quiet since our children moved away. Margaret patted her arm. Now I'll leave you to freshen up. Come down when you're ready. I suspect you'll want to see Ryder before he leaves. Left alone, Willow moved to the window, which overlooked the Prestons' well-tended garden. Beyond it, she could see the main street of Bridgeport, people going about their business unaware of the danger brewing outside town. Somewhere out there, Calvin Blackwell and his men were planning their next move, and Ryder intended to meet them head-on. The thought crystallized her own resolve. She wouldn't meekly stay behind while he rode into danger. Not again. When she descended the stairs 20 minutes later, having washed the trail dust from her face and changed into her cleanest dress, she found Ryder alone in the front parlor, hat in hands, clearly preparing to depart. You're leaving already? She asked, trying to keep the accusation from her voice. Spoke with Collins, he replied. He's sending 2 deputies to meet me at the ranch tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I need to prepare. It was more than she'd expected. He'd actually kept his promise to involve the law. Yet his determination to return to the ranch alone tonight still seemed unnecessarily reckless. Why not wait until morning? Go with the deputies. Because Blackwell could arrive tonight, he said simply. And I won't risk him finding the place empty and deciding to track me to town. Not with you here. Always protecting others, she thought, even at the cost of his own safety. Willow, he continued, stepping closer. I need you to promise you'll stay here no matter what you hear. The Prestons are good people. He paused. If things go badly, they'll help you get to Fort Worth or Dallas, wherever you want to start over. The stark acknowledgement of his possible death sent a chill through her. Don't talk like that, she said fiercely. You'll come back. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I intend to. But life's taught me to prepare for all outcomes. Impulsively, Willow closed the remaining distance between them and pressed her lips to his. For a heartbeat, he remained perfectly still, as though shocked by her boldness. Then his arms came around her, pulling her against him as he returned the kiss with unexpected tenderness. When they finally parted, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. That, he said softly, is something worth coming back for. Then come back, she whispered. Not for vengeance. Not even for justice. Come back for this for us. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I will, he promised. And when this is over, we'll talk about that future I mentioned, the one where you stay. With visible reluctance, he stepped away, settling his hat on his head. Stay safe, Willow Lawson. You too, Ryder Dawson. Watching him walk out the door was one of the hardest things she'd ever done. But even as the sound of his horse's hoofbeats faded into the distance, Willow was forming a plan of her own. The Prestons proved to be gracious hosts, including her in their evening meal and conversation without pressing for details about her relationship with Ryder. Dr. Preston spoke of his practice, Margaret of the town's small literary society, creating a bubble of normalcy that might have been comforting under other circumstances. As the evening progressed, Willow feigned increasing fatigue, excusing herself early to retire. Once in her room, however, she remained fully dressed, sitting by the window and watching as the town gradually settled for the night. Only when the last lights in the Preston household had been extinguished did she move, retrieving the small bag she'd repacked earlier and slipping silently down the stairs. The note she left on the hall table was brief but clear. Dr. and Mrs. Preston, forgive my deception and my departure. I cannot remain safely in town while Ryder faces danger alone. By the time you read this, I will be well on my way. Please understand that this is my choice, made freely. Thank you for your kindness. Willow Lawson. The stables at the edge of town were quiet, the night watchman dozing in his chair. Willow had never stolen anything in her life, despite the accusations in Sweetwater, but desperate times called for desperate measures. She selected a sturdy mare, saddled her quickly with equipment borrowed from an adjacent stall, and led the animal out the back way before mounting. The road to Ryder's ranch was dark but clear in the moonlight. Willow rode as swiftly as she dared, grateful for the riding lessons Ryder had given her during her convalescence. Every shadow seemed to harbor potential danger. Every night sound a warning, but she pressed on, driven by the certainty that she was needed. It was past midnight when she finally approached the ranch, slowing her borrowed horse to a walk and scanning for any sign of unwelcome visitors. The property appeared quiet, with only a single light visible in the main house's kitchen window. Still cautious, Willow circled wide, approaching from the stream side where trees provided cover. She had nearly reached the house when a strong arm suddenly closed around her waist, dragging her from the saddle. A hand clamped over her mouth before she could scream, and she found herself pulled against a familiar body. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Ryder hissed in her ear, his voice tight with anger and fear. When she stopped struggling, he removed his hand from her mouth but kept his arm firmly around her waist. "I couldn't stay in town," she whispered. "Not with you out here alone." "Damn it, Willow. I left you with the Prestons to keep you safe." "And I left them for the same reason, to keep you safe," she countered. "Two guns are better than one." He made a sound of frustrated disbelief, but didn't continue arguing, instead pulling her toward the house, staying in the shadows. Once inside, he barricaded the door behind them. The kitchen table had been transformed into an impromptu arsenal, with several rifles, 2 shotguns, and boxes of ammunition laid out in neat rows. A coffee pot bubbled on the stove, suggesting he'd been preparing for a long night's vigil. "Have they come yet?" Willow asked, removing her coat. "No," Ryder replied, still clearly unhappy with her presence but accepting the reality of it. "But they will. Probably before dawn." He gestured to the weapons. "Can you shoot?" "My father taught me. I'm better with a rifle than a handgun." He nodded, selecting a Winchester repeater from the table and checking its action before handing it to her. "Stay upstairs, then. Second bedroom has the best view of the approach from the north. I'll take the kitchen and parlor." Willow accepted the rifle, surprised by his quick adaptation to her presence. "You're not going to try to lock me in the root cellar?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Would it work?" "No. Then we'll do it this way instead." His expression sobered. "But if I tell you to run, Willow, you run. No arguments." She wanted to refuse such a condition outright but recognized the fear behind his demand. "Only if the situation is truly hopeless," she compromised. "I won't abandon you for anything less." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, accepting her terms. "Get upstairs, and stay low away from the windows unless you're actively shooting." As Willow climbed the stairs, rifle in hand, the unreality of the situation struck her. Mere weeks ago, she'd been fighting for her life in the dirt of Sweetwater Creek. Now she was willingly placing herself in the path of danger again, but this time by choice, for someone who mattered. The hours of waiting were the worst. Positioned in the darkened bedroom, Willow kept vigil through the window, watching the moonlit landscape for any sign of movement. Occasionally, she heard Ryder moving below, checking doors and windows, adjusting his own defensive preparations. The knowledge that he was near provided comfort, even as anxiety for his safety gnawed at her. The attack, when it finally came, arrived with the first pale light of pre-dawn. Willow spotted them first dark shapes moving across the pasture, at least 6 riders approaching slowly, weapons visible even at a distance. "Ryder," she called softly, knowing he'd hear her through the open stairwell. "North pasture, 6 of them." His footsteps crossed rapidly to the front of the house. After a moment, his voice drifted up to her. "I see them. Hold your fire until they're closer." The riders split into 2 groups as they neared the house, clearly planning to surround it. Willow adjusted her position, moving to keep the approaching men in view while staying hidden behind the curtain. A voice called out from beyond the front porch, harsh in the morning stillness. "Dawson, we know you're in there. Send out the woman and maybe we'll let you live." Ryder's reply was succinct and profane, followed by, "Show yourself, Blackwell. Or are you still letting others do your dirty work?" A different voice answered, cold with malice. "Right here, Ranger. Been a long time coming, hasn't it? 3 years you've been hunting my boys. But the game ends today." "It should have ended when you murdered my sister," Ryder called back. "But you ran then, just like you've been running ever since." The taunt had its intended effect. Willow glimpsed a man separating from the others, advancing toward the house with a swagger that suggested supreme confidence. "Your sister died squealing," the man Blackwell shouted. "Just like you're gonna die today. And then I'll find that woman you've been keeping and show her the same hospitality." The threat sent ice through Willow's veins, but she kept her rifle steady, watching as Blackwell continued his approach, 2 men flanking him while the others circled toward the back of the house. "On my signal," Ryder's voice came quietly from below. The moment stretched, taut with anticipation. Then the crash of breaking glass from the back of the house shattered the silence, one of Blackwell's men making his move. "Now," Ryder shouted, and gunfire erupted from the kitchen. Willow sighted on one of the men approaching the front porch and squeezed the trigger. Her shot went wide, but it forced him to dive for cover. Her second attempt found its mark, and the man fell, clutching his shoulder. Chaos descended as bullets splintered wood and shattered windows. Willow fired methodically, focusing on keeping the attackers from reaching the house rather than killing shots. Below, she could hear Ryder moving from window to window, his shots measured and precise. A scream from the back of the house suggested at least one attacker had met Ryder's defenses there. but the odds were still against them, and Willow knew their position would eventually be overwhelmed. Then, just as despair began to creep in, new gunfire erupted from the direction of the road but not aimed at the house. Two of Blackwell's men fell immediately, caught in the crossfire. "Marshall's men," Ryder called up to her, his voice tight with relieved tension. "They came early." The tide turned swiftly after that. Caught between Ryder and Willow in the house and the deputies on the road, Blackwell's remaining men broke and ran for their horses. All except Blackwell himself, who charged the front porch in a desperate gamble. Willow heard the crash of the front door being kicked in, followed by the sounds of a struggle below. Fear propelled her from her position, down the stairs with her rifle gripped tightly. She reached the bottom in time to see Ryder and Blackwell locked in combat in the parlor, firearms discarded in favor of brutal hand-to-hand fighting. Blackwell had a knife, its blade catching the early morning light as he slashed at Ryder, who was bleeding from a cut across his forearm. "Ryder!" Willow's cry distracted Blackwell for a crucial second. Ryder seized the opportunity, delivering a powerful blow to his opponent's jaw that sent him staggering back. Before Blackwell could recover, Ryder had drawn the revolver from his belt and aimed it squarely at the other man's chest. "It's over, Calvin," he said, his voice deadly calm. "For Hannah. For all the others you've hurt." Blackwell's face contorted with hatred. "Do it then," he spat. "Finish it, Ranger." Willow watched, breath held, as Ryder's finger tightened on the trigger. In his eyes, she could see the weight of his 3-year quest for vengeance and something else. Weariness. The recognition that another death, even this one, wouldn't heal the wounds of the past. "No," Ryder said finally, though his aim didn't waver. "You don't die today. You stand trial for your crimes, all of them." As if on cue, heavy footsteps sounded on the porch and 2 men in deputy badges entered, weapons drawn. "Marshal Collins sends his regards," the older of the 2 said, taking in the scene. "Says he figured you might need help sooner rather than later." Ryder nodded, never taking his eyes off Blackwell as the deputies moved to restrain him. Only when the outlaw was securely bound did he lower his weapon, turning to Willow with a mix of emotions playing across his face: relief, exhaustion, and something deeper she dared not name yet. "You're bleeding," she said, moving to his side. "It's nothing serious," he replied, though he didn't resist when she took his arm to examine the wound. The deputies led Blackwell outside to where their horses waited, along with 2 other captured members of his gang. The remainder had either escaped or lay dead on the ranch grounds. "We'll take them to Bridgeport," the older deputy informed them. "Marshall will want statements from both of you, but it can wait till later today." When they were alone again, Willow guided Ryder to the kitchen, making him sit while she fetched water and bandages. Neither spoke as she cleaned and bound his wound, the intimacy of the moment saying more than words could. Finally, as she tied off the bandage, Ryder caught her hand in his. "You could have been killed," he said softly, "coming back here alone." "So could you," she countered. "That was the point." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Has anyone ever told you you're the most stubborn woman alive?" "Not in those exact words," she smiled faintly. "Usually there are more colorful adjectives involved." That drew a genuine laugh from him, the tension of the night's events beginning to dissipate. "Willow Lawson," he said, shaking his head. "What am I going to do with you?" Her heart quickened at the tenderness in his voice. "Well," she said carefully, "you did mention something about me staying permanently." His expression grew serious, his eyes searching hers. "I did, and I meant it." He paused. "But that was before Blackwell found us, before you saw what my past can bring to your doorstep." "I'm not afraid of your past," she said firmly, "or mine. We've both survived things that should have broken us, Maybe that's why we found each other." "Found each other," he repeated, a wonder in his voice as though the concept had just fully registered. "Is that what happened in Sweetwater Creek?" "I think so," Willow said. "They beat me until I couldn't stand, until you lifted me and said I'd stand with you, and now I am, standing with you by choice." Ryder rose from his chair, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. "Then stay," he whispered against her hair. "Not as my housekeeper. Not as someone under my protection, but as my partner, my wife if you'll have me." The proposal, simple and direct like the man himself, brought tears to Willow's eyes. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll have you, Ryder Dawson." His kiss was gentle at first, mindful of the bruises that had not yet fully faded from her face. But as she responded, it deepened, conveying all the emotions that had grown between them: respect, admiration, desire, and yes, love. A love forged in adversity but no less real for its difficult beginnings. When they finally parted, breathless, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "It won't always be easy," he warned. "The ranch is hard work, and I'm not an easy man at the best of times." "And I'm not an easy woman," she replied with a smile. "Ask anyone in Sweetwater Creek. We'll manage." They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the early morning light streaming through the kitchen windows. Outside, the world continued: deputies taking prisoners to justice, ranch hands tending livestock, townspeople going about their lives. But in this quiet moment, Willow felt as though they existed in a world of their own making, one built on shared understanding and second chances. "We should go to Bridgeport," Ryder said eventually. "Give our statements to Collins, and let the Prestons know you're safe before they raise a search party." Willow winced at the reminder of her midnight departure. "Margaret will have my hide for that note I left." "I'll protect you," Ryder promised with a hint of humor. "Though after seeing how you handle a rifle, I'm not sure you need it." As they prepared to ride into town, surveying the damage to the ranch in daylight, Willow was struck by how quickly life could change. 6 weeks ago, she'd been fighting for survival in the dust of Sweetwater Creek. Now she stood beside a man who saw her strength rather than her vulnerability, planning a future neither had dared hope for. "What are you thinking?" Ryder asked, noticing her contemplative expression as he saddled their horses. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," she replied honestly. "If those men hadn't beaten me that day, if you hadn't passed through town just then." He stepped close, cupping her face in his hands. "Then I'd have spent the rest of my life not knowing what I was missing," he finished for her. "And that would have been the real tragedy." The trip to Bridgeport was a stark contrast to their journey the previous day. Though tired and bearing the marks of battle, they rode side by side in companionable silence, the shared ordeal having cemented something between them that needed no words. At the marshal's office, their statements were taken efficiently, with Collins himself assuring them that Blackwell would face the full extent of the law for his crimes. The news that the notorious outlaw had finally been captured spread quickly through town, and by the time they reached the Prestons' home, it seemed everyone knew of the dawn confrontation at Dawson Ranch. Margaret Preston greeted Willow with a mixture of relief and exasperation, though her scolding was tempered by obvious affection. "You might have told us your plans," she chided. "We spent half the night worried sick." "I'm sorry," Willow said sincerely. "But I couldn't stay behind, not knowing Ryder was facing them alone." Margaret's gaze softened as she looked between them, noting their clasped hands and the protective way Ryder stood beside Willow. "Well," she said with a knowing smile, "it seems things worked out for the best. Will you stay for lunch? You both look like you could use a good meal." Over a hearty lunch that stretched into the afternoon, plans were made. The Prestons would host a small gathering in 2 weeks' time when Ryder and Willow would be married by the town's minister. Owen, who had joined them after being released from Heinrich's care, would continue working at the ranch, with expanded responsibilities now that the threat of Blackwell was removed. And the barn would be rebuilt, with help from neighboring ranchers who had long respected Ryder from a distance, but would now have reason to know him better. As the autumn progressed into winter, the ranch was gradually restored and improved. The new barn rose larger than its predecessor, with space for more horses and better storage for the expanding herd. The house, too, underwent transformation as Willow put her mark on it, not erasing the past, but adding her own touch to create something that belonged to both of them. Their wedding day dawned clear and crisp, with the first hint of frost silvering the grass. The small gathering at the Prestons' home included not only their hosts and Owen, but Heinrich and his family, Marshal Collins and his deputies, and a few other townspeople who had become friends in the wake of Blackwell's capture. Willow wore a new dress of soft blue that Margaret had helped her select, with a single white rose from the Prestons' greenhouse tucked into her hair. Ryder, almost unrecognizable in a new suit, watched her approach with a look of such tender amazement that tears threatened to spill from her eyes. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, the promises exchanged carrying the weight of all they had overcome to reach this moment. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder's kiss was both gentle and possessive, a declaration to all present that this woman was his heart's choice. Later, as they rode home together in the fading winter light, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "What are you thinking, Mrs. Dawson?" Ryder asked, the new name bringing a smile to both their faces. "That I never expected to find this," she admitted. "After my parents died, I thought I'd spend my life just surviving, never belonging anywhere or to anyone." He reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "And now I know better," she said simply. "Now I know that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, if we're brave enough to reach for them." As they crested the rise overlooking their home, for it was truly hers now too, Willow felt a sense of completion that had eluded her for so long. The ranch stretched before them, peaceful in the gathering dusk, smoke rising from the chimney where Owen had lit a fire in welcome. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Yes," Ryder agreed, though his eyes were on her rather than the landscape. "The most beautiful sight I've ever seen." That night, as they lay together in the quietness of their room, bodies entwined and hearts beating as one, Willow thought of all the twists of fate that had led them to each other. The violence that had marked both their pasts had somehow, improbably, created the conditions for this moment of perfect peace. "I love you, Ryder Dawson," she whispered into the darkness. His arms tightened around her, his lips finding hers in a tender kiss. "And I love you, Willow Dawson. More than I ever thought possible." In the years that followed, their life together was not without challenges. The ranch prospered but required constant work. Their first child, a daughter named Hannah after Ryder's sister, arrived during a spring blizzard, with only Owen to ride for the doctor. 2 sons followed in subsequent years, filling the once quiet house with laughter and the patter of small feet. The people of Bridgeport, initially curious about the taciturn rancher and his unconventional wife, gradually accepted them as fixtures in the community. Willow joined Margaret's literary society, while Ryder served occasionally as a deputy when Collins needed extra hands. Their annual harvest celebrations became something of a tradition, drawing neighbors from miles around for food, music, and companionship. And always, through the changing seasons and the passing years, they stood together, the woman who had once been beaten until she couldn't stand, and the man who had lifted her and promised she would stand with him. A promise kept, day after day, through all life's joys and sorrows, binding them together more surely than any formal vows. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard where once violence had reigned. Ryder's arm encircled Willow's waist, drawing her close against the evening chill. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly, a question he still posed occasionally, as though amazed by his good fortune. Willow turned in his embrace, facing the man whose courage and compassion had changed the course of her life. The years had added silver to his hair and new lines around his eyes, but the strength and tenderness that had first drawn her to him remained unchanged. "Not one," she answered truthfully, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "Every step, even the painful ones, brought me here, brought me home." As darkness fell around them and the stars emerged overhead, they remained on the porch, two people who had found in each other not just love but redemption. Two people who had learned that sometimes the deepest wounds can lead to the most profound healing, and that even in the harshest wilderness, love could take root and flourish.